very much. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Bon dia. Again, thank you very much to our colleagues in the region, in the media, for again joining us for this virtual briefing. At present, we plan this to be the final update of the year, a year that has turned out to be the most difficult one ever for our industry. As usual, as Mark has mentioned, I'm going to make some initial remarks in English, and we'll be very happy to take questions and questions and answers after in Spanish and in English. During our last briefing, I provided our forecast for 2020 and the outlook for 2021. However, I think it's worthy to take a quick look at these figures once again. Global net losses for 2020 is estimated to be $118.5 billion industry-wide. In 2021, the forecast is for a net loss to be around $38.7 billion. Airlines in North America are expected to lose around $45.8 billion, and those airlines in the Latin American and Caribbean region are expected to lose around $5 billion in 2020. In addition to the forecast, we now have the actual passenger figures for October, which show the recovery is indeed very slow. Global air traffic was down 70.6% compared to the same months of 2019. International passenger demand was down 87.8% compared to the same time of October 2019, virtually unchanged from the 88% year-to-year decline recorded in September. North American carriers traffic tumbled 88.2% in October, a slight improvement from the 91% they experienced back in September. Latin American airlines experienced 86% demand drop in October compared to the same of last year. The region, however, showed the greatest improvement in September, when year-on-year demand was down 92.3%. It is the domestic demand that has driven what little recovery there has been, with October traffic figures down 40.8% compared to the prior year. This is an improvement from the 43% of the year-over-year decline in September. Brazil, being the sixth largest domestic market globally, saw demand drop by 44.5% as compared to 2019. Along with the domestic airlines in Mexico, those in Brazil have staved the strongest recovery, with some operating closer to their pre-COVID-19 levels on domestic flights. So this is beginning to see some good news. Nevertheless, all markets have suffered, as you can see from the chart on the screen. This shows us the substantial estimated revenue losses per market, along with estimated job loss and reductions in GDP contribution. As an example of another sector which was affected by COVID-19, we have compared the development of the salmon and trout export from Chile through air transportation in relation to the number of flights, as most fish is exported by air cargo. And a similar development can be seen in the flour exports from Colombia. With international traffic recovery dropping off, IATA this week once again called on governments to provide the support for the industry. Among others, we have identified 5 proven ways in which governments can help stimulate air traffic markets while avoiding adding more debt to the already highly leveraged airline balance sheet. One is the temporary waiver or suspension of government charges, taxes, or fees to airlines and passengers will reduce flight costs and lower travel costs for passengers. Route subsidies is another for flights to local and regional destinations to support connectivity for rural communities and businesses. Financial incentives in the form of rewards for operating flights or seats flown to which can support airlines while load factors or yield are too low. Advanced ticket purchases that government can use for future trips or distribute to the traveling public in the form of vouchers to support travel and tourism. And then passenger travel subsidy form of vouchers for passengers or as a cash back on overall travel cost. Governments must really consider all these tools at their disposal in order to keep the industry afloat. Proposed increases from all island states across the Caribbean, making a costly region even more expensive than it was before to visitors. Flowbus Air Navigation Service provider proposing a 20% fee increase starting the 1st of January 2021. And a $40 per person charge for travel insurance when you go to the Bahamas. Cuba is up per ticket. Appeal to the and rather support aviation regulation that can generate traffic burden on carriers and supporting a faster recovery of the industry. In Central America, despite the numerous requested protocols following the CART principle, which were effective for repertoire flights, adapt to the reality of commercial flights. Consequently, airlines have deferred their restart dates until the country adapts protocols to international standards. To establish air transport and we call on the authorities in Nicaragua to adopt the necessary protocols as its neighbors and the rest of the region have done. Before to your questions, I would like the topic of vaccines, the distribution, which will be a challenge for the at least. Canada, yes, they improved the use of vaccines will most likely follow in the coming weeks. Getting the vaccine distributed will require collaboration across the logistical value chain, government. From our perspective alone, here are some obstacles or challenges that will need to be overcome. The first is the capacity and connectivity. The global route network has been reduced dramatically. Airlines in reestablishing air connectivity to ensure adequate capacity available. We need the right facilities, and the vaccine needs stored in a deep frozen state, making ultra cold across the supply chain essential, both on the airport and off. More timely regulatory approvals and storage and clearance by customs and health authorities will be essential. for border processing include introducing fast-track procedures for overflights and ending permits for COVID-19 vaccine, and potential tariff relief to facilitate the movement of these vaccines. Vaccines are also highly valuable commodities. This is security so important. Arrangements must be in place to ensure that the shipment remains secure from tampering and theft. Processing are in place already, but the huge volume of vaccine shipments will require early plannings to ensure that they are scalable. Therefore, IATA has approved the exemption from COVID testing regimes, which are applied to regular case or home base and very limited contact with the local population when layovers at far destination. And the aviation workers are airline ground staff, air traffic controllers, and airport staff running the airport operations, that they should also be considered as essential workers and have first access to the vaccine when it is made available. Interfering and risk in order for the recovery to take place. And they have and stimulate intra-regional in tourism. Many Latins and those from the Caribbean like to travel to the U.S. and Europe for holidays. But due to COVID, lower consumer confidence for low travel and entry restrictions, staying within the region and discovering its treasures is a real alternative. And we encourage governments in this region to promote this intra-regional travel between their governments and their counterparts in other countries. With that, we're ready to take it.
Thank you. Gracias. And with that, we'll start going through the questions. And the first one is coming from Argentina in Spanish. I'll do a quick English translation and then read the original in Spanish. So it has to do with the requirement for the PCR test for arriving passengers, if we believe this is the correct way forward, and also the testing requirements for crew. Entonces, de Argentina viene la pregunta. La Argentina dispuso de la obligatoriedad de contar con un test negativo hacia el país. ¿Cree que eso es el camino correcto? ¿Qué sucederá con las tripulaciones? So Peter, over to you. I believe MJ is also on the line.
Okay, muchas gracias. Sí puedo contestar la primera pregunta, la segunda la voy a pasar a María José sobre el tema de los procedimientos de los tripulantes. La posición de IATA, de la industria a nivel global, es que vemos utilizando el testing como un mecanismo seguro y eficiente para trabajar con los gobiernos en reabrir sus fronteras y eliminar las restricciones y las cuarentenas. Es que desde nuestro punto de vista vemos como medida para eliminar restricciones aplique el requerimiento de un PCR negativo para entrar en el país. Es muy parecido a lo que están haciendo muchos países. I'll say very quickly now over to today. From our side, in the industry, we have a position that we support tests, an alternative to remove and country restriction and quarantine. So in the case of Argentina, like in many other countries that have implemented PCR negative testing, we support that move as a means to open their borders and remove restrictions. What we will hope is that with the Argentinian government will eliminate the current restrictions that they have to countries like in Europe or the United States and Canada. María José, yo no tengo información sobre la normativa de los pilotos.
Sí, buenas tardes, Peter, gracias. La normativa para Apple, que el PCR se solicita a todos, pero lo hemos verificado y no se está solicitando test a las tripulaciones. Eso ya está verificado. State in English, currently the PCR tests are not being required to cruise in Argentina. Gracias.
Gracias, MJ. So basically, in line with what we've asked the governments to do is to refrain from testing crews on arrival. Okay, with that, we have a similar question from Colombia on PCR testing, and I believe also Andres is on the line from our Bogotá office to provide any additional input. En Colombia, bueno, estamos debatiendo la decisión de un juez que ordenó al gobierno exigir pruebas PCR para todos los viajeros que llegan del exterior. ¿Cómo está la situación en otros países? So this has to do with the fact that a judge in Colombia is trying to force the government to reinstate PCR testing, and the journalists would like to know what the situation is and also what the situation is in other countries. So, I don't know, Peter, ¿tú quieres empezar?
No, empiezo. La decisión que se ha tomado a raíz del dictamen de un juez es preocupante para el sector, sobre todo que se está viendo una recuperación muy sana en el caso colombiano, tanto doméstico como internacional. En Colombia se estaba aplicando el concepto del contact tracing de una manera muy útil y se estaba demostrando que con los protocolos de bioseguridad que se implementó por la CART de OARCI se estaban cumpliendo y el transporte aéreo no se estaba convirtiendo en un vector de la transmisión del COVID. La industria en estos meses que han operado en el país se ha hecho de una manera muy responsable, muy coordinada con el gobierno y vemos este nuevo procedimiento, requerimiento jurídico como retrasar el progreso que habíamos hecho.
You want a quick comment in English on the situation?
Yes. So, it's unfortunate to see that a municipal judge has required the central government to possibly implement a testing regime now in Colombia for entry into the country, when for now a few months the industry working with government had implemented the procedures of contact tracing in a very effective and responsible manner. We had been applying as an industry, the airlines, the airports, contact tracing to make sure that the procedures were being upheld, and we had no major incidents during these 2 months, primarily because the biosafety protocols that were implemented by the ICAO CART, had been implemented in a very successful manner in Colombia, being applied by all the users, and the industry was not, or air transportation was not, a vector of the virus. So from an industry standpoint, we were complying with the government mandates, acting in a responsible manner, and transporting passengers in a safe manner. Unfortunately, this now pushes us back, regresses in the hard work of what the industry had done up to now.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And with that, we'll go to a question which came in English. Several parts to it. So first of all, the new restrictions in Chile, and I think those are all to do with local quarantine going into place for the general population, but I guess, Peter, you have more information on that. The $150 fee for Grenada, when does that come to effect? And what effect do we see that on ticket prices? Could they kind of double? Entonces, la pregunta pregunta viene en inglés preguntando sobre las nuevas restricciones dentro de Chile y también de los $150 que quiere cobrar la isla de Granada para los billetes de avión en cuándo va a empezar eso.
Okay, so I'll start with the I'll start in English and then move to Spanish. The Chile local quarantine restrictions in country is really quite disappointing from an industry standpoint. We certainly understand the standpoint that the government is trying to minimize the risk and make sure that they're able to control the spread of the virus. Unfortunately, there are other options that could have been implemented in a very successful manner to safeguard passenger or passenger safety and also control the spread of the virus, such as requiring PCR negative testing for all passengers getting on an airplane. That would have been the procedure that we would have followed. Again, working closely with the government, they would have been able to taking a very proactive step, but at the same time, basically not stopping aviation. Now, passengers will have to comply with 4 options if they are to be able to travel for exceptional reasons, but the common traveler that wants to go and see a family member or travel for business or for tourism will not be able to. On the contrary, a passenger that is coming internationally into the country will not be restricted to move within the country. While this measure has now been implemented as of and IATA will get in contact with the government, is to encourage them to look at other options that will, again, meet the needs of public safety, but not grounding air transportation in the country moving forward. And again, we hope this is a short-term restriction that is in play, considering all the very good work that the Chilean government had made over the last several weeks to reopen its market. I don't know when the Grenada fee came in. I don't know if Annalene's on the line and that she may know the date.
Yes, hi, I'm Annalene Lord, Area Manager for the Caribbean. The fee has been proposed. No date of implementation has been announced, but it has been proposed to us and we've pushed back on it, but there's no firm date of implementation. Once we have that information, we will share it.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know, Peter, if you want to talk in Spanish about the restrictions in Chile, maybe. I think the Spanish-speaking media would probably be interested, and maybe also put it into the context that, the international borders have just reopened. So now if someone can fly in from overseas, but if they want to connect domestically, that's of course going to become more difficult, which could affect the overall demand.
Okay, thank you. Muy rápidamente aquí, como muchos sabrán, el gobierno chileno desde hoy implementaron la normativa que se está limitando el movimiento de personas debido al el COVID que se está expandiendo por el país. Desafortunadamente implementaron normativas que van a hacer daño a la industria como un modo de transporte dentro del país. Al sector nos hubiera gustado haber podido coordinar con las autoridades para implementar, si iba a haber restricciones, por lo menos que permitiera el transporte aéreo a seguir, incluso con implementar un concepto de las pruebas negativo PCR como requerimiento para subirse en un avión. Solo esos pasajeros que hubieran tenido un negativo tendrían la autorización para viajar, pero por lo menos permitiría el movimiento de estas personas. De la misma manera que hoy en día para entrar a Chile se requiere un PCR negativo. Vemos esto un poco como un retroceso en todo el buen trabajo que se ha llevado a cabo en el último mes para reabrir las fronteras con Chile o eliminar las restricciones que existían, y realmente esperemos ha sido nuestra solicitud oficial al gobierno que la normativa que está en vigor en estos momentos sea lo más corto plazo y que consideren por lo menos implementar el testing o las pruebas como una alternativa para poder seguir manteniendo la conectividad tan importante que es en Chile el transporte aéreo.
Ok, gracias.
Y sobre los $150 de la isla de Granada, está todavía para fijarse la fecha.
Gracias. Con esto vamos a una pregunta sobre la carga. Bueno, la Comisión Latinoamericana de Aviación Civil pidió se permita la séptima libertad en carga ante el reto de transportar la vacuna. IATA se suma a esta petición de más libertades aéreas. No sabía que había esto, pero...
No, lo que sí puedo comentar es lo que tenemos que asegurar trabajando con nuestros gobiernos es que se eliminen cualquier tipo de restricciones, burocracias que podría existir en el movimiento de la carga con las vacunas durante estos próximos 48 meses. Va a ser crítico que los gobiernos en nuestra región den flexibilidad, que abren sus mercados, para que el movimiento de las vacunas por aire sea lo más factible, lo más fácil y lo más rápido.
Maybe just a quick summary of that in English, yeah.
So what we're hoping, our general call to governments in the region, particularly with the movement, the transportation of the vaccines, is that our governments in the region comply and meet the criteria that we have mentioned in my opening comments, but most importantly, that governments not be bureaucratic, that they make it as flexible, as easy to move the vaccines across borders within the country, and that the air transportation sector not find itself that it's having to comply with paperwork and certain processes that can put at risk the movement of the cargo and put at risk the viability of the process moving forward. So we need flexibility, we need coordination, we need transparency during this process to ensure that we can move these vaccines quickly, safely, and efficiently.
Okay, thank you. And with that, let's go to Panama for a question. El riesgo de nuevos cierres de aeropuertos debido al incremento de los casos del COVID es alto, medio o bajo. So this is, how do we see the likelihood of airports closing again, seeing that COVID numbers overall globally are still on the rise? Y lo otro sería que tan factible es que los países se pongan de acuerdo para realizar pruebas de PCR a todos los pasajeros en el destino de origen. So this is the sort of testing policy that we're advocating.
Okay. Con la primera pregunta, el ejemplo lo tenemos en Chile, que ahora ha puesto en vigor una restricción de movimiento por el país durante un periodo de tiempo. En nuestro punto de vista, como industria y nuevamente por el bien social, económico y la recuperación del país, no es bueno restringir el transporte aéreo en estos momentos o ya hacia adelante. La industria ha realizado, ha cumplido con todas las obligaciones que exige el Estado. Se han implementado medidas de bioseguridad. Hay normativas tanto en los aeropuertos como a bordo de los aviones. Los pasajeros tienen ciertos requisitos que tienen que cumplir y ahora se está implementando el régimen de las pruebas PCR. Y creemos que con estos factores, estos indicadores, nos indica que hemos tenido un gran éxito en el sentido que el número de contagios ha sido mínimo a bordo de los aviones. El sector está transportando a pasajeros de una manera segura. Lo que tenemos que hacer, incluso lo vemos a nivel mundial, como la pregunta indica, estamos viendo incrementos en Europa, en Norteamérica, pero en esos mercados no ha habido ningún tipo de restricción para parar el transporte aéreo. Se han implementado medidas para asegurar que no se transporten los pasajeros de un punto a otro, y ese punto es el tema de las pruebas, que sería la segunda pregunta que me hacen. A nivel regional, lo que buscamos como alternativa para evitar cierre de fronteras, restricciones de movimiento de personas o cuarentena, la opción más viable que tenemos como industria es el tema del PCR negativo para tener autorización para abordar en la región. Es el estándar que ya poco a poco ya se está empezando a implementar por todo el mundo, y tenemos que tener en consideración que aunque tenemos una vacuna que va a estar disponible muy pronto, puede ser hasta 48 meses hasta que tengamos acceso a esa vacuna a nivel mundial. Lo que sí, tenemos que coexistir, convivir con el COVID hasta que se erradique la pandemia. Por eso vemos como el método más viable los PCR como requisito para poder viajar, en adición a los protocolos que ya se han implementado. Let me say very quickly in English?
Yeah, very quickly, thanks.
Okay, so in English, in terms of the closures, we are quite concerned about the risk as the number of COVID cases may spread in the region, where we may have governments that may implement restrictions for passenger movements. We just saw that in Chile. That is not something we encourage nor support, because the industry has done all it can in terms of implementing biosafety measures, ensuring that passengers do meet with criteria in order to travel. We now have the testing mechanisms in place with PCR. The airlines and the airports have taken measures from their side. There is no significant evidence that shows that the industry is a significant vector of the transmission of the COVID virus. Even in Europe, in North America, where the number of cases have gone up, air transportation has not come to a halt. These governments, in some cases, have implemented certain measures, such as the need to have a PCR negative to travel, but air transportation continues to play its vital function in those countries to make sure that the movement of people, the movement of cargo continue to be done in a serious and responsible way. Testing, from our perspective, is the way to go, particularly considering that while we have good news on the vaccine, it may take up to 48 months for the whole entire world to have access to the vaccine. So we need to be cognizant that we have to coexist with the COVID-19, have a balance between economic recovery and public safety, and we believe that government implementation of PCR testing is certainly the right course to take in reestablishing air connectivity in the country, in the region, and across the globe.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And with that, we'll go to Brazil, and then we'll head back north to Mexico. Bueno, pasamos ya a las preguntas que vienen do Brasil, y después vamos a México. Entonces, Brasil y después México. From Brazil, we have the question if we could give any indications on the international market recovery to and from Brazil, as the country itself has seen quite a good bounce back on the domestic market. So what are our expectations on the international? And I believe Danny from our Brazil office is also on the line. So over to you, Peter.
Okay, so I will say, obviously the domestic market is recovering quicker than the international side. We have good capacity, good connectivity between Brazil and the rest of the world. That has recovered quite well. What has not recovered well is the number of passengers flying in the international markets, primarily because of the restrictions that are in place in Europe and in the United States, which is limiting Brazilians from traveling outside of the country to those two areas. But in terms of recovery, domestic is doing very well. Connectivity, international, is doing very well. And when we look at the bookings December 2020 over December 2019. In the case of Brazil, they are about 54.9% from what it was 1 year ago. Still quite way off. However, it is one of the best in the regions in terms of the differences. So that's what I have in terms of that. I don't know if Danny has any other information that I may not have.
No, Peter, nothing to add.
Okay, obrigado, Danny. So with that, we will move to Mexico, and we have one question, and I believe Quit is also our country manager from Mexico is also on the line. It concerns changes, staff changes at AFAC, one of the regulators. Bueno, una pregunta. Tras de la salida de Rodrigo Vázquez Colmenares de la AFAC, ¿han tenido acercamiento con la nueva directiva? ¿Cómo ha sido? No sé, Peter, si tú quieres empezar, y si no, pasamos a Quit.
Se lo paso a Quit, que él ha tenido la interacción.
Ok. Quit la UA.
Gracias. Gracias, Peter. Gracias, Marcus. Hola, ¿qué tal a todos? Buena tarde. Correcto, desde la salida de Rodrigo Vázquez, que fue efectiva a partir del 1 de diciembre, hemos estado colaborando con un equipo designado al interior de la FAC y previo a la salida de Rodrigo trabajando en una serie de prioridades y diferentes acciones a las que estamos enfocados para asegurar pues, que esta transición se dé de una manera ordenada. Estamos en contacto diario con la gente de la FAC, con el equipo AFAC, con la gente del subsecretario. Por el momento no tenemos conocimiento de un nuevo titular, de una designación oficial. Estaremos pendientes, evidentemente, tratando de, en cuanto esto sea designado, el nuevo titular, podamos de inmediato establecer comunicación con el nuevo director y poder establecer las prioridades que hemos tenido marcadas. Básicamente, Marcus.
Ok, gracias. Y creo, como es una pregunta de México, no hace falta la traducción por el momento. Como nos solo quedan 15 minutos, creo que tenemos otras preguntas a responder. Bueno, tenemos más de México. ¿Por qué ha subido el montón de ingresos que perderán las aerolíneas en México desde este año? Ya tenemos... bueno, las cifras en la pantalla. Tiene que ver con la complicada situación financiera de algunas líneas aéreas y quiere saber también sobre Interjet cómo avanzan su plan de recuperación según la información que tiene, bueno, IATA. Bueno, creo que sobre ese tema no podemos decir más, pero o mucho. Creo que sobre las cifras en general podemos comentar. Peter y Quit.
Quit, si quieres empiezo yo y después sigues tú. El tema de Interjet ya lo ha mencionado Market, no podemos entrar, no entramos en el tema de las financieras de la línea aérea. Ustedes saben cómo va la situación allí. En el caso mexicano, con el tema de los ingresos, en México, como saben, nunca se cerró como sus fronteras, tanto a nivel doméstico e internacional, que es buenas noticias. La capacidad prácticamente está ya a lo que era el año pasado, el 2019. Ha habido una inversión muy grande en la conectividad doméstica y se está viendo una buena conectividad, sobre todo con punto de destino de turismo. Pero también hay restricciones en que mexicanos no pueden viajar a Europa y a otras regiones que puede ser razón de ello y el número de pasajeros que están volando. Quid, no sé si tú tienes más información sobre el tema de los ingresos.
No, Peter, creo que lo has dicho perfectamente, ¿no? Es básicamente los factores externos que pues están limitando la expansión de las aerolíneas en mercados internacionales principalmente, mientras estamos teniendo un mercado doméstico con signos positivos y tendencias de recuperación. Pero nada más que agregar, Peter.
Ok, gracias. Y creo para aclarar un poquito, las cifras que te mostramos para los ingresos son ingresos del mercado. Entonces son las ventas hacia, desde y dentro del país de todas las líneas aéreas que están operando en este país, no solo por una línea aérea. Entonces, just to make that clear, the revenue impact numbers we currently have on the slide is the reduction in revenues generated by the market, so that is sales to, from, and within that market, not just regarding the airlines which are based in that market. So it's a market value, not an airline-specific value, just to make that clear.
And
yeah,
Marcus,
Peter?
just to add, Mexico is at 47.7% in terms of net bookings year over year, December 2020, with comparable to 2019, which is actually the best in the region. So they've done quite well. But even then, you're still talking about a 47% difference from one year to another.
Yeah. And of course, the figures, the latest forecasts include those months where traffic was really down, even though we know that Brazil and Mexico never completely shut international traffic. Just the restrictions on the other end brought the passenger numbers down as well. So this is for the whole year, which of course includes the lowest months that we had, especially March, April, and May.
And I'll add one thing just from a regional perspective. We are now entering a very busy time of the year for our region. In terms of the Southern Cone, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, this is entering their summer season, their long holiday period in which they travel quite a lot. So we hope that will be a strong recovery. And again, with the restrictions being removed in many of these markets, that should help certainly on bookings and revenues. When we look at the Caribbean, in the Caribbean and the Mexico side, as the cold winter comes into the U.S. and Canada, we also expect more focus of travel into those areas. So we are coming into a period of time which is very important for our region in terms of South Americans traveling for vacation for their summer holidays, but also as well for Europeans and North Americans to travel into the Caribbean region for holidays as well, and get away from the cold weather in the north and come to the warmer in the south. Marcus?
Am I on mute? Sorry.
You are.
The unmute work, okay, sorry, gracias. Entonces, ya pasamos a otra pregunta de México. Se refiere al Aeropuerto Internacional de la Ciudad de México. Ya les respondió el aeropuerto a la petición que no hicieran incrementar la TUA el próximo año como incentivo del impacto de la pandemia. No sé si Quit tiene alguna información sobre eso.
Sí, Marcos, yo la tomo. La decisión sobre la determinación del TUA y su cobro no depende totalmente del aeropuerto. Hemos abierto conversaciones con ellos, pero estamos todavía conversando con ellos y con las autoridades que están a cargo de este fideicomiso y que son los responsables de determinar los potenciales incrementos anuales. Así que seguimos aún todavía una solución concreta al respecto.
Y eso es como parte de lo que hemos presentado hoy, la petición a los gobiernos que miren las posibilidades de ayudar a las líneas aéreas o al sector en general, por ejemplo, que no incrementar o cobrar algunas tasas, ¿no? Okay.
Correcto, Marcus.
Ok, entonces vamos a ver qué nos queda en el chat. No sé, tengo otra pregunta que se refiere a las pruebas PCR o rápidas, y si eso sería una posible recomendación para el mercado mexicano, es exigir las pruebas.
Bueno, en estos momentos, en el caso mexicano, no hay ningún tipo de requerimientos para viajar. Se han implementado los procedimientos de la CART, de OASI, que son las medidas de bioseguridad. La línea aérea y los aeropuertos han implementado esas medidas y los pasajeros han sido informados de los requerimientos que ellos van a tener que seguir. Nuevamente, con lo que se ha implementado hasta ahora, no hay ningún tipo de data que demuestre que el número de casos de México ha incrementado a raíz de contagios a bordo del avión. Así que, en nuestro punto de vista, en el caso mexicano, es que está funcionando con las normativas que hay en estos momentos.
Okay, gracias. I guess we'll come to one more.
I'm just going to say very quickly.
Okay.
While IATA supports the testing regimes, PCR, when governments are looking for alternative measures to remove quarantine or to avoid quarantine and restrictions, we certainly support it. In the case of Mexico, Mexico never closed its borders, doesn't have quarantine, nor does it have restrictions of travel. Thus, the biosafety protocols that have been put in place by using the ICAO recommendations, the measures implemented by the airports, by the airlines, and the responsibility that the passenger has to comply with has met the objective to safeguard air transportation and not be a vector of the virus. So we want to make just very clear that we support testing and PCR negative travel in order to avoid quarantine, closure of borders, or country restriction in movements of people. In those countries where the borders have been open and have been operating with the biosafety measures, we support the measures that are in place as of now.
Okay, I think with that we have a few questions pertaining just to traffic outlook. So we have one on the U.S. Latin American traffic. Are there any markets specifically where this is growing or where this is holding up? And I have a more or less a similar one, which sort of is generally asking, where do we see traffic rebounding? And Lars, maybe we could just also show the slide for the sort of booking figures we've had recently on comparing those actually to where the restrictions are. And maybe Peter can just comment on the, where we see the recovery happening within the region at present.
Yeah. So, Lars, when you show, I mentioned before, Mexico has had the strongest recoveries in terms of bookings year over year for the month of December, which is, again, good news. But it's a country that has remained open since the crisis began. It is also helps geographically that it is very close in terms of geography with North America and Canada, where people will feel comfortable to travel in close proximity. We need to remember public confidence right now to travel is quite low in some cases. So where you have beach resort areas, Cancun, Mazatlan, Los Cabos, relatively close in terms of travel distances, those are markets that are predicted to do very well. And that's where you see a lot of the U.S. carriers and Canadian looking at capacity increases during their winter schedule. The same thing for the Caribbean is also looking at the outlook looks quite good for their winter season as well. As more markets continue to reopen, we expect more connectivity and more movement of people. And again, Lars, can you show the chart with the Latin America shows entry with testing can boost travel? That's the one you want to show, right, Marcus?
Yes, that's the one we'd like to see.
Yeah.
I think maybe there's a technical, maybe he can't move the slides. We'll send it around anyhow, and I'll try and maybe pull it up from my end.
And I'll say very quickly, you look at Brazil, 54.9% year over year, Ecuador 54, Colombia 57.6, Chile 58.6.
There we go.
And here you can see in those markets where you do not have restrictions or the market has been fully open or with some testing, the recovery in terms of booking for December are much quicker than in those countries where you have closure to foreigners or quarantine, as in the case of Uruguay, Suriname, or Venezuela. But you look to the far right, you see the progress that is being made in that case. Also, I will say that's not shown here, but possibly when you have restrictions of movement, that also has an impact on your connectivity.
Okay, then I have one more from Argentina asking our opinion on the involvement of the individual provinces in sort of needing to provide the approval for like domestic flights. I think we had a similar issue when Colombia reopened, where a lot of the authority was given to the mayors, and it seems to be a similar issue that the individual provinces have a say in which domestic flights are allowed to operate and which ones not. So eso es el rol de la provincia para abrir los vuelos domésticos en Argentina.
Nuestro punto de vista es que las decisiones se tendrían que llevar por el gobierno central, no por los municipios. Hemos visto en el caso de Argentina, Colombia, Canadá, incluso en Estados Unidos, donde los estados o las provincias han implementado ciertos mecanismos para poder viajar. Eso está causando, primero, restablecer la conectividad se hace mucho más compleja, confunde a los pasajeros, tanto a los extranjeros como pasajeros del mismo país, para poder viajar dentro del país. Nuestro punto de vista es más importante, o creemos que el rol de responsabilidad se tiene que llevar a cabo por el gobierno central, federal, ya que estamos hablando de una pandemia global que tiene un impacto tanto doméstico como internacional, y cuando distintos municipios, provincias implementan distintas medidas, eso realmente hace la recuperación mucho más difícil. You want me to say it very quickly in English?
Yeah, I think it might be of interest to some of those who are non-Spanish speakers on the call.
Okay, very quickly, in terms of the municipalities or provinces or states having the decision right to decide on restart or the movement of passengers connectivity. From our standpoint, we believe the decision should be made, needs to be made by the central government, not by the provinces or municipalities or the states. We have seen this case extend in many parts of the world. In our region, Argentina, Colombia, Canada, even the United States, we've seen different variances where the local government makes the decision to reopen or maintain closed or even implement certain restrictions. This is very difficult for the aviation industry to be able to restart in an effective, aligned, and responsible manner, where within a country, you may have different types of measures that need to be implemented. So from our perspective, it should be the central government making the central decision. This is a pandemic from a global perspective, impacting the region and impacting within the country, and we believe to have better coordination, better alignment, the central government needs to drive these decisions.
Okay, and with that, I think we'll come to the last sort of two questions. I have one more from Mexico, and this is sort of a quick summary in English. It's just relating to the fact that Mexico has sort of the least number of restrictions, and if that is an opportunity, I think, for the market to attract people or travelers who might go to other countries that they can't get into right now. ¿Cuál es la perspectiva de la recuperación de viajeros internacionales hacia México? Dado que otros países permanecen con restricciones, México podría aprovechar esta situación para atraer mayor conexión de estos aeropuertos en diversos países.
Well, México está México está aprovechando la situación actual que vive. La recuperación de ventas de los bookings para diciembre comparado al año pasado fue el mejor, el 47,7%. La conectividad a nivel de capacidad de línea aérea también estamos prácticamente a los niveles del año pasado. Hemos visto Volaris, Aeroméxico, Viva Airbus, todos volver con números muy positivos. Vemos la conectividad internacional también volviendo a los destinos de turismo, tanto desde Europa como de Norteamérica e incluso de la región. Así que yo creo que es el ejemplo a seguir en estos momentos, como los procesos que han implementado, asegurando que las medidas de bioseguridad se lleven a cabo, las líneas aéreas, los aeropuertos, las medidas que ellos han implementado, y dejando el mercado abierto, está ayudando en esa recuperación social, económica, y sobre todo que el transporte aéreo está ayudando y no siendo ese vector del virus como algunos podían creerse que sería el movimiento de pasajeros a bordo del avión. Viajar se ha convertido en un modo muy seguro, sobre todo cuando estamos hablando referencia a la pandemia.
Okay, gracias. And before we come sort of to the last question, which I think also is a good one for closing, just a general comment. There's a few asking on the issue of the essential workers classification and vaccination. The country that we mentioned is sort of the first to officially say this within the continent is Barbados. And there is also a press release on its way, generally from IATA, on calling for this by governments. It was part of our AGM resolution. And also there is a guide by the WHO which sort of gives recommendations on which sections of the population should be vaccinated when, and transportation workers are in there as essential workers. So I can gladly put that link into the presentation when we send it to you later. Tenemos algunas preguntas sobre la clasificación como empleados esenciales para los empleados del sector para recibir las vacunas. Hay una recomendación de parte de la Organización Mundial de la Salud, que le puedo dar el link después de la llamada, que explica un poquito eso, y eso fue también parte de la resolución que pasó la Asamblea General de IATA hace 2 semanas. Y con eso, la última pregunta is in English, and it is generally asking about the various things that we're advocating from sort of lifting restrictions, the classification of workers, which I just mentioned, PCR testing, and government fees. So maybe that gives you sort of the opportunity to just sort of close with a quick summary in English and Spanish, sort of on the different calls to government that we are making. Peter, over to you.
Okay, thank you. You made a very good summary, so I'm not sure I'll add much more than that. But yes, I will say the priority for the industry at this moment is reopening borders, restarting aviation without restrictions, no quarantines. We have alternative measures, which is PCR testing as a way to avoid it. But the industry, again, in these last several months, have acted in a very responsible manner in developing, implementing, and carrying out the biosafety protocols, both from an airline and airport standpoint. We have not, there's no demonstration, and institutions like Harvard and Oxford have demonstrated that aviation is not a vector of the virus, that we've been able to transport millions of passengers, billions of passengers throughout this entire crisis in a very safe manner. We do need government leadership moving forward. We need government leadership helping us restore public confidence. We need government help to ensure that the vaccine will be moved in a safe, fast, and responsible manner without bureaucracies and obstacles. We need government to help ensure that the air transport sector, the airports personnel, the airline personnel, both in the air and on the ground, the air traffic controllers, all be considered as essential workers and have quick access to the vaccine to ensure that the air transport sector can continue to provide reliable, safe services and help the governments across the region to safely transport the vaccines to all our communities. And also at the same time, we need our governments to help from a financial standpoint. We cannot, the industry cannot bear more increases in taxes and levies. What we need governments to do is to help us stimulate passenger growth, restart, and by that is actually making your countries cheaper to come in, more affordable, so you have more passengers coming to your region. If we're able to do all this that I've just mentioned, I believe that we will be in a very good position in 2021 to begin that long recovery that will be needed over the next couple of years. You want me to say in Spanish?
Sí, creo que sería muy amable de terminar hoy en español.
Perfecto. Ahora tengo que ver si me acuerdo todo lo que dije. Morque lo había mencionado, la importancia es el pedido a nuestros gobiernos de la región. Tenemos que trabajar más estrechamente, más alineado, con más transparencia para asegurarnos que la recuperación de nuestras economías, la recuperación de la confianza de nuestros ciudadanos para viajar vuelva y que el transporte aéreo se haga más fuerte y más útil para nuestros gobiernos en el 2021. Para eso necesitamos que los gobiernos nos ayuden con las vacunas, que tengamos los procesos, las regulaciones y evitemos la burocracia para poder mover las vacunas en una manera eficiente, rápida y segura. Durante los próximos 24 meses necesitamos que nuestros gobiernos ayuden para asegurar que los empleados del sector de transporte aéreo, la gente de tránsito aéreo, el personal de aeroportuario y esos personales de las líneas aéreas sean considerados como empleados esenciales y que tengan acceso a la vacuna para que puedan aportar y ayudar en el transporte de la vacuna por toda la región, que va a ser nuevamente la logística más compleja y más importante en la historia de nuestro sector. Necesitamos también que nuestros gobiernos nos ayuden y se aseguren de reabrir las fronteras, eliminar las restricciones y asegurar que no se implementen las cuarentenas. Hoy en día el transporte aéreo ha demostrado que no es un vector del virus, que puede transportar y que está transportando miles de millones de pasajeros a nivel global, a nivel regional, de una manera segura, y que los gobiernos tengan confianza en el sector para ayudar en esa recuperación social y económica. Pero no podemos, y será muy duro para esa industria recuperarse si seguimos con restricciones y las medidas cuarentenas. Y por último, que la industria, que los gobiernos nos ayuden durante esta época para no incrementar las tasas o los costes usuarios en sus países, que hagan lo contrario, que eliminen esos costes para estimular más pasajeros, más consumidores, más viajeros para que visiten nuestros países en la región, que nos permitirá una recuperación social y económica mucho más rápida. Si conseguimos todo esto, lo que yo he mencionado, yo creo que el 2021 va a ser un año de buena recuperación y buenas oportunidades para América Latina y el Caribe. Muchas gracias. Y bueno, aprovecho también esta oportunidad a nuestros colegas de los medios, primero por todo el apoyo que nos ha dado este año. Les deseo a ustedes unas felices fiestas, que se mantengan felices con sus familias, pero de una manera que estén bien durante estas fechas. I just want to say in English, I want to take this opportunity to thank the media for the tremendous support that you have given us during this year, during the crisis, communicating in a very honest and transparent manner our messaging. And I want to wish you and your loved ones happy holidays, Be safe, and we look forward to continue to work with you in the new year. So thank you very much to everyone. Be safe.